This is Stacia, and today we're going to be taking a look at the King's Gambit, Bishop's Gambit. And we're going to look at this from the black side and examine the first 10 or so moves of the main line. We'll actually understand each move as we go, and hopefully that way when we face this crazy opening, which goes with f4 King's Gambit, takes, and bishop c4, we'll have some idea of what we're doing, and we'll have a line we can use against it. So if we see this in a tournament, we will be ready. So, okay, let's get started. So this starts with e4 and e5 and f4, and this is the King's Gambit. So in the King's Gambit, white is hoping to give up a pawn, but distract our center pawn away so that they can take the full center with the pawns on e4 and d4. So although d4 though can be met with check, so they often go with knight f3 first, stopping that check. And this is sort of the main line of the King's Gambit. In these positions, I really think playing d5 is a good move, just challenging the center immediately, and then when they take, we can aim to recapture with a knight. This is called the modern defense, and I would definitely recommend it. But after e takes f4, they don't have to play this knight f3 move. There is this crazy option of bishop c4, and now this is what we call the King's Bishop Gambit accepted. So white is saying that we can check on h4 with our queen if we want to. And so if we do this, their idea is to simply go king to f1. And although that king will never castle and never be truly safe, white is going to argue that we're wasting time by moving our queen out. We're going to have to move our queen again. And while we're doing that, they're going to be rapidly developing. It's a good argument, but it's not totally true. Jan Gustafsson, who is our main guy for this main line, he has an e4, e5 chessable course where he says this move is completely fine to play, but he also gives another recommendation, which will be our main line. But he says that after here and say something like d6, knight to f3, yes, we do have to move our queen again, but we can go to f6 where our pawn is now protected, our bishop is open, and although white has some initiative here for sure after something like d4, they have given up a full pawn and their king's on f1, so black should be totally fine here. And if we ask the engine, it actually agrees. It says black is better. So you can definitely play this way. So now you understand what white is trying to get from us. So they might be expecting this move, queen h4 check, and be ready for that. In fact, I'm certain that they would be. So that is why we're going to play a different move. Now, I will tell you that this move is going to be a really nice treat for you guys because it is not the main move in the database. The main move is knight to f6. There is another move, d5, which is actually a way to give the pawn back. White could simply take, and then we attack the bishop. So you could do this. At least our bishop gets open this way. But we're going to go with what is actually the fourth move in the database. So always a good idea to find lines that are a little more rare, but actually quite powerful. And that's what we have here with this move, which is actually number 4 on our list. And that is knight c6. But if you look at the stats for this move, they look quite amazing. So this is a little bit of a secret weapon that I'm showing you today, and I hope that you like it. So to play this move, knight c6, we should understand what we're doing. The knight is developing, coming to a good square and controlling the center, but it's not really clear concretely why we're putting the knight on c6. The reason is that in a key variation, the knight becomes very important. So let's have a look at it. The main move in this position is d4, but why is white not playing knight to f3? This would solve the problem with queen h4 check and be one step closer to castling. It's a very desirable move, but now I'm going to show you why. So the idea behind knight c6 is hidden in this variation, because what we want to do here is play the move g5, try to hold on to our pawn. The queen is guarding g5, so we can play this move. Notice that if we had played knight to f6, that move would not be available, and the knight could simply take. So, so knight c6 does allow this, and now basically white generally will try to undermine our pawns like this. So here we want to play g4. So sort of the point of g5 is that we can meet h4 with g4, and the knight is now attacked. So this knight in the normal King's Gambit lines jumps to e5, and now we see why knight c6 is a useful move. The knight cannot come to e5 because of our knight, so he will have to come to the g5 square, where we need to be aware that f7 is under attack. But now, once again, the knight on c6 is a hero. He now jumps to e5, attacking the bishop, but also safeguarding our f7 pawn. So this is why the knight on c6 is so useful. It actually makes this knight f3 variation not nearly as good for white, and if the white player doesn't know what they're doing, they will likely fall into that. So, okay, that is why we see the main move as the move d4. Okay, now on d4, we can check, we can do that, and this will most likely transpose into what we saw before. We can simply play d6 and knight f3, queen f6. And this is pretty much the same position that we had before. I'll make this our main line, this knight c6 move, d4. So, but I'm going to give you, of course, our main line move, which is the move knight to f6. So this is a very bold move, and this is why it helps to look at openings sometimes, because this is a move that I might be a little afraid to play in a real tournament game, and wouldn't do so lightly, because we are inviting things like this e5 move, and we're going to have to be a little careful since white has such a powerful center and pretty easy development from here. So after knight to f6, the main move is actually knight to c3, but we definitely want to ask the question, what happens if white decides to play e5, kicking away our knight? After all, the main idea behind this move, d4, when white plays this, is not only to build the strong center, which makes a lot of sense, it is to recapture the pawn on f4. So knight f6 doesn't protect our pawn, but what it does do is counterattack the e pawn. So that's one of the main ideas here. Notice that after g5, this idea doesn't work here as well, because after h4 and g4, remember that in the other line there was a knight on f3, so we could play g4 with tempo on that knight. Here there's no tempo, so white would simply capture our pawn and have an amazing position. I think white is much better here, so don't fall into that. Instead, we are going to simply play knight f6, and if white wants to play e5, we're going to say no problem. We'll simply play d5 against this, and if they want to take our knight, we will take their bishop, And just be aware that when you allow variations like this, you got to watch that your e7 square is covered. There are some traps that white might have where this will be a bigger deal, but in this exact position, after something like queen e2 check, we don't have to play bishop e7, which would lose our bishop. Instead, we do have bishop e6. And so this position looks great for black. So we're good here. So this e5 thing is not going to work. We've got that covered. So that is why the main move is knight c3. So why is white playing knight c3? Well, it's really simple. They want to develop, but also remember that I said the knight on f6 is actually threatening the pawn on e4. So knight c3 covers that pawn. So I think what we're going to do is simply go bishop to b4 and pin that knight. Now the pawn is attacked again, so they're going to have to deal with that. If they try to take their pawn on f4, sorry, that's not going to work. We can play knight takes e4. I do believe this is very good for black, and as you can see, the engine likes this quite a bit. So they still cannot take on f4. So we're basically trying to stop white from easily winning back their pawn. So after this pin, white actually plays knight to e2. That looks like a little bit of a concession to my eyes. It's pretty clear that white is protecting their pin knight a bit and preventing things like knight takes e4, knight takes e4, pawn takes forking, because they will be able to take with a knight. So so after this knight to e2 move, which is our main line, here it's very tempting to play knight takes e4. I think I'll use the computer's help here, because this is the move I would probably play in a game. It just looks so natural. But now we see the idea. White is simply going to castle here. Okay, and white once white castles like this, now they have a rook, a knight, and a bishop on this pawn. So even if we do take and allow them to take with a knight, now our knight is attacked, and they are going to basically regain their pawn. For example, if we take like this, I think they could simply, play, oh, it's our turn. Okay, well, I mean, I know we can play d5, but after bishop d3 and castle, they're going to win back their pawn. So I guess we are a pawn up here, but this position looks fairly pleasant for both sides. I mean, white didn't get a dream position, but they do have two bishops to compensate for the double pawn, and they still do have more development and initiative. But as you can see, the computer does believe in the white position enough. Black is fine here, but white is also okay as well. So that sort of explains why we're actually not going to take here, as natural as that looks. We can actually throw in a very cool move, which is the move pawn to f3. So this is giving our pawn back, but in a way that is a little bit better for us. I call this move like a disruption move. This also happens in the Vienna Gambit main line, and this happens in many decline lines of gambits, and that's sort of what we have here as well. We're not going to allow white to so comfortably play bishop takes f4 and give the pawn back that way. Nope, instead we're pushing our pawn one square, attacking the knight, so white has to react. And if they simply try to move their knight away, we can take on g2. This doesn't look so good for white. They would then have to play rook g1. They're never castling here, and it looks like they have to waste time to try and just capture that pawn. So it's not ideal. So really the best move is going to be to simply capture. But now we have successfully transformed the pawn structure and kind of messed up white's normal setup. So in that other line, notice how white has a very comfortable setup with the two bishops and everything is sort of harmonious. Well, after f3, that's not going to happen. After the pawn takes, they have not an open f file, but an open g file. So they would need to play moves like castle and king h1 and rook g1. Notice that would take 3 full turns just to get the rook on g1. So it's way more awkward for white to play this pawn structure. So that's why we are doing this. Okay, so anyway, after taking, our mainline move now is basically the last thing that we want to achieve, aside from castling. Of course, we want a castle, but we would love to play not d6, but d5. If we can get d5 in, you know that we're doing extremely well. And in this main line, we do exactly that. We get this move d5. It looks like we don't have enough because the pawn, the bishop, and the knight are on the pawn, but don't forget that we still have this pin. So the d5 square is not protected by the knight. And now white in the main line simply captures. They have really nothing better than this. If I look at the white position, yeah, what else can they really do here? If white were to simply castle, for example, the bishop's still hanging. So, yeah, what do you do? If you play bishop b3, okay, we can sort of kind of tear down the white center a little bit with this move. And then we can always take the knight. And after they recapture, let's say they take with the knight. Now the d pawn is hanging. So if they take this way, though, the e pawn is hanging. So as you can see, the pressure on the center is real. So this is quite nice. So that does explain why white has to simply take on d5. A little bit of a concession for sure. This is not what white wants to do. It creates an isolated pawn on f3, and it allows our knight to come to d5 when we recapture, hitting their pinned knight. Definitely not ideal for white. So our main line is looking very nice. As you can see, computer totally agrees here. And from here, the main move for white is to simply castle on move 9. And now all we want to do now is castle. But be careful, of course, because when white castles, what are they doing? They're breaking the pin. So if we just castle right now, we will lose the game. So they will take and we'll lose the game. So don't do that. We have to first deal with that. So we can simply capture. I do feel that captures are probably going to benefit black. What I mean is trading off a set of pieces is going to benefit black slightly more than white. So this is totally fine for us. And now the main move is the move bishop to, or I'm sorry, pawn takes c3. So as you can see, the white pawn structure got a bit mangled in this battle, and our bishop is now attacked. So we simply move our bishop to d6. Excellent square, excellent diagonal. And all we have left to do is castle, and it does not look like white can really stop us from doing that. So in the main line, white plays knight to g3, improving their worst place piece. This bishop, you could argue, is quite good on c1. Really no need to develop him just yet. so knight g3, because clearly this knight is headed for e4. Okay, and so now we finally get to castle. This is going to conclude our main line because the opening is pretty much complete. You could argue that the bishop is already developed. We have a beautiful diagonal, but it's pretty clear that we will likely come to h3 and gain a tempo on that rook at some point. And this is a great position. So I hope that this video helped you, and we'll run through the moves one last time just to sort of burn it into our brains. So our main line was e4, e5, f4, the king's gambit, and we accept the gambit, and we were looking at the main move, or our main move is bishop c4, although typical king's gambit is knight f3. So knight c6 is our main move because, as you remember, in the variation with knight f3, this knight comes in super handy after g5, h5 here, knight g5, we have knight e5. So the main move is d4 instead, trying to collect the pawn, but we counterattack with knight f6, attacking e4. We're ready to meet e5 with d5, so no worries there. And white plays knight c3, protecting the pawn so that they can then capture, but no problem. We pin the knight, developing our bishop. And now the white play starts to get a little awkward with knight to e2, although that does guard some things and possibly threatens to take on f4, but we're going to now throw in our little disruption move, changing the pawn structure so that white now has a g file and it'll be harder to use. Then we get d5 attacking in the center with tempo on the bishop. White has nothing better than to take, but now their center is collapsing and their pawn structure is fractured. We retake with a knight using the pin. So white castles, breaking that pin. So we simply trade off those knights, move our bishop out of danger, and after knight to g3, we get castled and enjoy a good position. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Of course, I want to credit Jan Gustafsson and his E4, E5 lifetime repertoire course on Chessable, which I do own. It's quite awesome. He was the one that turned me on to this knight c6 line. So I know that I feel fully ready to face this opening, and I hope that you do too. So this is Stacia, and have a great day. Okay, bye.